The man leading America's top law enforcement agency couldn't clearly explain one of the most basic principles in our Constitution, due process. Merkley had to literally ask, "Have you even read the Constitution?" That's not political theater. That's a constitutional crisis in plain sight.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Director Patel. And so as I understood it, you testified yesterday that you'd like to have another $1 billion added on to the FY25 level to do the additional work you'd like to do on drug interdiction, fentanyl in general, and anti-terrorism. And today you gave us a budget that requests cutting $500 million. Which is it? Do you want us to, what are you asking of this committee? To add funds, add $1 billion, or to cut $500 million?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate the opportunity. What I'm asking for is that with more, I can simply do more. And I was giving examples of what more I could do. I can do the mission, and am in support of the budget here, and I'm working with appropriators and you to fill the gaps.
So you support the budget presented that cuts $500 million, but you also support us adding $1 billion should we choose to do that?
Well, I can't not support the budget as proposed, because then I would be supporting no budget.
Okay. Well, we've got those two options. We do look forward to further details from you about how you plan to modify the function of FBI on these different missions that you've highlighted today, so that we can give it the appropriate consideration. Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
And it is really the freedom clause of the United States. It was 4 years into being a nation when Congress and the states said, hey, we have to make sure that there's not an over-aggressive government in the future that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And you're familiar that that applies to all persons in the United States.
Yes, Senator.
So there's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador without due process. And does that concern you?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process or are supposed to be afforded due process. All the FBI did and all the FBI will continue to do is arrest those that have violated the law.
Okay, but to arrest, you have to investigate. Have you launched an investigation of this violation of the Freedom Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, I don't know that I agree with your characterization.
Well, that was my first question, whether or not you agree with the Fifth Amendment and are prepared to defend it. It is your job to investigate crimes.
Yes, I agree with the Fifth Amendment. I agree with the entire Constitution, and the men and women at the FBI decide.
So are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it. The men and women at the FBI who are trained to open investigations will make those calls.
So you have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
Well, it's actually not it's a question also of law.
But your position is that every one of those individuals is by constitutional right afforded due process. I don't know the answer to that. I'm telling you.
You haven't read the Constitution?
It
says all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every single one of the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It says no person.
It doesn't say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it, because it's also been affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly. In the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status. The Supreme Court in Reno versus Flores. I mean, but it's the plain language of the Constitution. It concerns me that you're not familiar with the core concept of due process applying to all persons as written in black and white in the Constitution.
As the first public defender who's ever served at the FBI as its director, I am more aware of due process than any predecessor in my seat. You are delineating between removal proceedings and criminal acts. My job is to investigate criminal acts. That's what we do.
You are aware that the Fifth Amendment refers to taking away liberty, and when people are arrested on the street, detained and sent out of the country, that their liberty has been taken away.
Senator, that is a constitutional question that you are asking me to answer. It's not for me to answer.
The question has already been answered by the Supreme Court that they're protected. Therefore, it's a violation of law, and it's your responsibility to open an investigation. And you're saying today you will not do so?
I am not the agency involved in removal proceedings. That is a different branch of government.
So if an agency other than the FBI violates the law and the Constitution, you will not investigate because it's a different agency?
I will investigate every violation of law.
Well, you have, but you just said you're not investigating.
No. You and I are in disagreement on what is a violation of law. I have yet to hear from the Supreme Court your position as you have adjudicated it.
Well, very, very interesting, because the Supreme Court's been very clear, and I had heard you were trained in the law, so I expected maybe you would try to uphold it. You also took an oath to the Constitution.
Thank you for the reminder.
Well, it's important to remind you, since you're apparently unfamiliar with the very basics of the core protection of freedom in our Constitution.
What I am familiar with is protecting the American public, and that's what
Let me close with one question, Mr. Chairman. Will you make sure that due process in every action of the FBI is completely honored under your time as director?
Will I ensure that due process is followed?
Yes.
Under the Constitution?
Completely. Send that message throughout the FBI that due process must be followed, is constitutionally required. Make sure that it's done under your direction.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
What we just saw between Senator Jeff Merkley and FBI Director Kash Patel is one of those moments that stops you in your tracks, not because of political drama, but because of what it reveals about the state of constitutional understanding at the very top of American law enforcement. When Senator Merkley asked Patel if he was familiar with the Fifth Amendment, the senator wasn't asking a trick question. He was appealing to the foundation of American democracy, that no person, no matter who they are, can be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It's one of the most sacred guarantees in the Constitution, written to protect citizens and non-citizens alike from government abuse. But Patel's response, "I'm not a constitutional scholar," said everything we needed to know. This wasn't a question of scholarly debate. It was about principle. Due process isn't academic. It's the bedrock of fairness in a democracy. It's what separates a government of laws from a government of power. And yet, here we have the head of the FBI, an agency with immense reach over people's lives, dodging responsibility for upholding that very principle. Merkley's question about immigrants being swept off the streets and deported without hearings cuts to the moral and legal core of America's identity. These aren't faceless statistics. They are human beings. Many of them came here seeking safety, opportunity, or a better life. The Constitution doesn't say we protect only citizens. It says no person shall be deprived of liberty without due process. The framers used the word person deliberately because the principle was universal. So when Patel tried to say that it's not his job to decide if due process was followed, Merkley pushed back hard, because that's precisely the kind of thinking that erodes democratic accountability. Every abuse of power in history begins with officials claiming it's not their responsibility. Every erosion of rights starts with someone in authority deciding that the Constitution doesn't apply to certain people. And that's the danger here. We're witnessing how the language of bureaucracy, "it's not for me to call balls and strikes," becomes a shield for inaction. The FBI director doesn't need to be a constitutional scholar to recognize when human rights are being violated. He needs to be a leader with the moral courage to say, "This isn't right." Merkley's frustration was palpable, and it should be. He reminded Patel and the country that this isn't about left or right. It's about the rule of law. The Constitution is not a suggestion. It's a promise, one that every government official swears to uphold. When that promise is broken, it doesn't just affect immigrants. It weakens the legal fabric that protects all of us. Because here's the truth most people miss. The moment we allow one group to be denied due process, we open the door for the same to happen to anyone else. The Constitution doesn't protect groups selectively. It protects the principle of justice itself. That's why Merkley's questioning was so important. He was standing up not just for the individuals deported, but for the integrity of American democracy. Think about the symbolism of Patel saying, "I have it right here," referring to the Constitution, as if possession equals understanding. That moment encapsulated something profound, the difference between holding the Constitution and actually upholding it. Many in power like to wave it around, quote from it, even use it as a prop. But the real test is whether they live by it, even when it's inconvenient, even when it challenges their own policies. Merkley's line, "That's what the Constitution says, I encourage you to read it," wasn't just a clapback. It was a call to conscience. It was a reminder that knowing the law is meaningless if you don't believe in its moral intent. And that's what makes this moment so revealing. When the nation's top law enforcement officer can't clearly affirm the right to due process, we should all be alarmed. This hearing should be a wake-up call. If the FBI director is uncertain about one of the most fundamental protections in the Bill of Rights, then what does that say about the direction of federal power? Are we slowly normalizing a system where expediency trumps legality, where the government can decide who deserves rights and who doesn't? That's why progressives and constitutionalists alike need to pay attention to exchanges like this, because the fight for due process isn't just a legal issue, it's a human issue. It's about ensuring that power is restrained, that people are not treated as disposable, and that the Constitution remains a living safeguard against tyranny. Senator Merkley was doing what every public servant should do, holding power accountable to principle. And his message resonates far beyond this hearing room. It's a reminder that democracy survives only when its defenders refuse to look away. If you're watching this and wondering what you can do, start by paying attention. Support leaders who understand that human rights are not optional. Demand transparency from agencies that wield immense power. And most importantly, never let the language of bureaucracy replace the moral language of justice. Because the Constitution isn't just a document, it's a moral contract between the people and their government. And every time an official like Kash Patel sidesteps that responsibility, it's up to us, the public, to remind them what that contract means. If you believe in protecting the rule of law, if you believe that justice and democracy are only as strong as our willingness to defend them, then stay engaged. Subscribe, keep watching, keep questioning. Because understanding these moments isn't about partisanship. It's about preserving the very idea of America. And that, more than anything else, is why this conversation matters.